David. Hi, welcome to the David Photography Channel. I'm David. Today we're talking about the Ricoh RZ-750. The RZ-750 is a 1989 compact zoom camera with a lens of 38mm to 76mm. The maximum aperture is f3.5 at the wide end, 38mm, and at 76mm it is 6.7. This is pretty standard or even really unremarkable, even for the time. So this might be something that you would pass up if you saw it in a thrift store bargain bin or something like that. But I'll tell you about why it's actually a pretty good camera, and it has some interesting features that you might find useful and generally good performance. This camera is also known as the Shotmaster Zoom in some markets. As for notable specs, we have a film speed range of 64 to 3200. The shutter speeds range from 3 seconds, which is pretty good for a long shutter speed, to 1/500th of a second, which is also pretty good for a fast shutter speed. Most compact cameras did not have 1/500th of a second available. Okay, looking up close, we can see this is obviously a plastic camera body, but the quality of the plastic isn't bad. It's pretty good, even feels a little bit premium. On the sides we can see that we have some nice grippy material that feels pretty good on your hands. And it does contribute significantly to the grip, the mold. You can see the sides are molded nicely. There's a nice little thumb grip on the back too. So this camera feels pretty good in the hand. Here there would be a clear plastic shield, but I dropped this camera, so that broke off. Luckily the camera is still fully functional and there's no problems with it. As for the size, this is a pretty standard size compact camera for the time, which is, makes it about the same size as a camera body without a lens. So nothing too special there. But of course it's far from being a pocketable compact camera. Looking inside, you can see nothing too special there. But you take a look at that lens. Wow, look at that giant rear element of the lens. It's really a really big rear element, and that kind of gives you some indication of the quality of the optic here. Otherwise, nothing too exciting here. You got a pressure plate, motor drive, etc. What you would expect. Batteries. The battery compartment needs some kind of fine object to open it. Can't just open it with your finger. And of course it takes a CRP2 battery. Now these are a little more expensive than and a little more harder to find than AA's, so, and they in fact might cost you more than the camera. We move the viewfinder cover and it turns on. which I find is a pretty good function. And it's much better than having a power switch. At the viewfinder, we have standard AF indicator and flash indicator. It's somewhat typical of the time and of its class of camera. It's a zooming Albata type viewfinder. It does have parallax correction marks in it. It's not really a selling point of this camera. It's sort of big enough. It's good enough. It's not the best viewfinder. It's I believe it's 0.63 magnification. So it's not that great, but it's also completely useful and functional. And on the top plate, we have a pretty good size LCD screen. And we have the zoom controls. And we have some buttons. First button here, this is the step zoom mode. If we select this, then the zoom is divided into several steps. Actually, just 3 steps: 38 millimeters, 54 millimeters, and 76 millimeters. So, not something I use, but you might find that useful. Self-timer, and that's the something. What is that? First mode we have is night mode. It's really like a night mode and infinity focus mode. It locks the focus at infinity and it disables flash. So you can take an exposure with ambient light only. The next mode is TV mode. This is so you don't so you can photograph a screen. This is not TV mode as in the what you see in Canon cameras having a TV mode. This is TV mode for actual televisions, so that you don't capture the screen flickering or banding in the shot. So it would turn off the flash, and it would limit the shutter speeds to those which are long enough to accommodate the refresh rate of a television. So you wouldn't get a partial image on a TV. Continuous mode. Yes, interval mode. This releases the shutter every 60 seconds. So you could do a time lapse or something like that. And then multi-exposure mode. After pushing the shutter release once, it'll take a photo. And it will not wind the motor drive. Now on the next shot, it will wind the motor drive because multi-exposure mode only works for one shot. So I can take a shot. If I want to expose again on that same negative, then I need to go back again and set the mode to multi-exposure. And once again, I can do it again. You can do it many times. I'm not sure what the limit is. Maybe it's like 9 or something like that. but it's probably as many as you would need to. Okay. For me, I just try to remember that to get to the ME mode, I need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 button presses so I can remember in case it's dark or something. Next, of course, we can see here's the shutter button. Now the shutter button is a nice hard plastic button. It's nice and big. It's convex. And it's nice and affirmative. I like the shutter button in this camera. You get a good half press. When you half press, you can hear the autofocus activation, and you should get an AF LED that tells you that it's locked focus. Now this camera doesn't have a force flash mode or a no flash mode. As you see, it just had those modes. Like most cameras, this actually just has an automatic flash that engages when it thinks that it needs flash, when the scene needs flash. So you need to manually disengage the flash by actually pushing down. When you do that, you can take a photo just like normal, and it changes the exposure to accommodate for no flash, and it doesn't fire the flash. So you need to do that because there is no flash mode with this camera. So some people might think that's annoying. I think it's good because I don't really like selecting the no flash mode, which I often use. It's just, it makes it more difficult to use it one-handed, I guess, which is not that much of a concern. Okay. And shutter release on this camera, nice and affirmative. Easy, in my opinion, pretty easy to stabilize. You know, I know when the shutter will release. I know it's easy to ascertain how much pressure you need to apply there to release the shutter. And it's nice and soft. So, pretty good shutter. And this autofocus system is really notable. It had 61 focusing steps, which in those days was pretty good. Considering most of these contemporary cameras that were sort of a similar build, similar customer base, typically had fewer than 20 autofocusing steps, which would be, you know, thinking of it like a sort of auto zone focus. It just determines the distance and selects the appropriate zone that would be closest to the subject. So with something like a C35AF, that was a very primitive early autofocus camera, so that I think probably had under 10 focusing steps or zones. Now this has 61, which is pretty good. By point of comparison, the Hexar RF, or Hexar AF, which is quite an expensive and premium camera, has 105 focusing steps. So that's, you know, considered good. The Hexar AF is considered to be one of the best autofocus cameras. So this is pretty good. Not necessarily the best, but the spec is quite good. And I find in practical use it has been very good, even surprisingly good. This has been able to lock focus in, for me, in several difficult to focus in situations. It has performed flawlessly and very quickly. So my experience with this autofocus system is it's excellent. It's very good. Now let's take a look at some images. First image here, we can see that the face of the dog is in focus, which is pretty impressive given the situation where this is at night and I'm also focusing through the bars of a gate, which with many cameras it would easily distract the focus and you would almost expect it to be front focused. Zooming in, we can see that the sharpness looks pretty good. And even off into the corner, it looks sharp with no vignetting. Next picture, we have a multi-exposure photo. Again, difficult situation. All the exposures were made in low light. And in fact, the second exposure was made one-handed while I was driving towards the subject. So the camera did a pretty good job of hitting the focus, although they're not perfectly sharp because I was moving, of course. Again, in the corners, we see that it's pretty good and sharp with no vignetting. Unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of photos that I didn't use flash on. I've used this camera almost exclusively with flash, so sorry. Again, here's another shot where we see in low light situation it nailed the focus and we get sharpness across the frame. So after having shot with this camera quite a bit, I'm pretty satisfied with it. I actually bought it in the first place for the multi-exposure feature to sort of supplement my FM2. I find that it's certainly not better than the functionality on the FM2, which was also featured in several other Nikon cameras. This works very well, and it figures well into muscle memory. In the Ricoh, of course, it resets the mode if it turns off and things like that. So it's not better. It's not even really great, but it's there, and it works, and it's useful. And I have found it useful for multi-exposures. Otherwise, it's a camera that feels pretty good. It's not extravagant. It's not a very premium camera, but for something that you might find for $2, it's pretty good. And that lens was surprisingly sharp. You know, it's easy to think that any zoom lens in a compact camera is going to be terrible. But it's not always true. That probably owes much to the short zoom range, but also consider that, well, most of the zoom compacts that there were designed around having a more impressive and longer zoom for marketing purposes, not for actually image making purposes. So I don't think this is really one of those cameras. A zoom lens, especially, compact zoom lens, can be good. And in fact, I think this is even better than a lot of those 38mm f2.8 compacts that were popular around the same time. I think it also beats those twin lens compacts, like there's a Canon Tele or something. Yeah, those they'll have a focal lengths of, they'll have like a 35 millimeter and a 70 millimeter, which, you know, they just move the elements around to create two different focal lengths with the flick of a switch. Usually those lenses, those cameras had pretty bad optics, and disappointing because some of them are actually pretty cool cameras and I like the concept. But really it turns out that just a camera with a short zoom range is actually optically better than those cameras, which I haven't found any twin lens cameras that are like that are very optically good. So yeah, I think this is a pretty good camera. I still continue to use it, and it's a great thing to buy if you just find it sitting around in a junk bin or whatever. Maybe you're like me, looking for a multi-exposure camera. There's also other cameras in the series that, as I understand it, vastly improved upon the already good autofocus in this camera. So, you know, if you find a RZ-800 or RZ-1000, you should pick one of those up too. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Thanks. See ya.